Before we begin, is there any questions?
Yes. We got our packet on Tuesday.
So Tuesday, we're not going to be finished with this packet until probably Tuesday or Wednesday. So the goal this week is to try and get done with the Hellenistic Greek sculptures by Tuesday. So tomorrow, probably the end of today, we can probably get started. Actually, this might not take as long as the other ones have been. There's a little bit smaller of a sort of a mini version of the thematic unit, because I'm only looking at the temple within a Greek and Roman sort of an ancient world context. I don't really pull out too far ahead of that for this particular thematic unit. So it'll be up to you tonight to kind of work on that. We'll be hopefully getting done with classical sculptors and Hellenistic sculptors by the end of Tuesday. That packet is going to be due for sure on Tuesday. There might be a slight chance that I let you take it home, but don't count on it. Tuesday you should be ready to turn this assignment in, be done with chapter 5, and be ready to start ancient Rome. I'm trying to get caught up I'm about a week and a half behind, but that's something that can be caught up because I have time built into the schedule throughout the next couple weeks to get that done. However, new assignments will start building up long-term things that you'll be doing along with these weekly assignments. So as soon as you get I feel like we're getting in a good mode where you understand the daily routine, and you'll be adding a more long-term assignment that goes with that. For instance, by Wednesday I'm going to give you guys the handout and the information about your first non-Western project. And that's a team activity, so it's a group team activity, which you guys jigsaw a separate chapter. So you'll be not only reading the Roman chapter and prepping a normal packet, but you'll also be prepping for an artwork from beyond the Western tradition that's concurrently developing along with the ancient world within this very narrow place that we define as Central Europe and in this Indo-European context. You're going to be taking a look at India, and you'll be taking a look at Asia, and you'll be taking a look at Africa. So there's other places that are having things develop at the same time that we normally don't talk about because it's not connected to the quote-unquote Western canon. Basically, how when white people run the world, they decide on what art is, and so we actually develop systems that allow us to be more balanced in our approach from a global perspective, which is what the Gardner's attempts to do. It's the new paradigm, and it's the new paradigm of the art history test. About 30% of it, or a third of the test, is based on non-Western artworks, and that includes requirements for you, mandatory non-Western examples for your extended responses, your large responses. So you'll be getting that information this week. Your Socratic seminar, we're going to do like not a Socratic seminar that we've been doing, but instead it'll be more like a peer review of your essay. So it'll be a full class Socratic seminar that you guys will be completing, in which we talk about in small Socratic seminar teams, and then in a full context, the final draft of the essay that you guys started on Friday. So write it down somewhere in your agenda, or not in the packet that you're going to turn in tomorrow, but somewhere more long term, that you need to have a final draft of that timed write that you did on Friday. So you want to be able to take that timed write, finalize it with real concrete examples. If you weren't able to find stuff, go ahead and find stuff. Whatever was identified to you, it should have been emailed to you. You guys made sure to do that with each other. If not, then you got to redo it or find a way to do it to get it done. But you should have had your sentences identified, color-coded. You can keep those. I don't care. That's for you. And that was for you also with your practice of how to read essays, not just write them. So if you're able to read and also analyze an essay and be able to grade an essay, as well as design the question, all of those components are going to help you learn to be a better writer. And that's the goal, is that I can't be your English teacher, but I can help prepare you to understand, okay, here's what AP level writing needs to look like. And many of you are freshmen. Some of you here, the upperclassmen, can be examples and kind of archetypes for us to look at, because they've had several years of English in high school. So they're the ones that we'll be using as examples. But there are, I think, some standout freshmen as well. There's some of you guys that I'd like to use as well. So on Thursday, I'll be talking about some of the, model essays that I've seen encountered in your packets before, and as well as ways in which you can improve your writing. But you're going to do it through looking at your final draft of your time write. So all you're doing is you're going to be finalizing that, and you'll be discussing that on Thursday. So there'll be specific questions up on the board for you guys to relate. Yes? It's due on Thursday. So make sure final draft due Thursday, and then I'm ready to talk, that I know enough about it that I can actually discuss it and potentially argue for my position as opposed to another. It might be kind of weird because we're not like, well, wait a second, it's an essay. Right? Why do I need to argue about it? But we'll talk about how that it will improve your writing. Yes?
What was the prompt for it? Because I got the email, but it was broken, so I couldn't.
Oh, you can get to the. I'll have to pull it up. Do you guys need me to pull up the prompt?
Yeah.
Okay. It had to do with deities, but I want to make sure that it's clear. Had to do with deity or religion. If you wanted, you can do the rough draft and the final draft as two separate documents. It's not required, but it's certainly helpful. That's how you normally do things. Let me pull it up here. You're saying that the link to actually get to the
the email was there, it just didn't have anything.
Oh, the actual prompt itself didn't have anything?
The actual email, it was corrupted.
Corrupted?
Yeah, we scanned it and it actually had a virus.
No, I think you're right. Did you download it?
No, because if it had a virus, then why would I download it?
No, it didn't have
Why
a
would I
virus.
download it if it had something that...
It didn't have a virus. You're fine. There would have been no way to have that. I think you check it again. The concepts of human beauty.
Wait, what is it again? Tiny.cc/
Art Quiz 6. So it's right on the board there. Art Quiz 6 is the title. Tiny.cc/ Art Quiz 6. The concepts of human beauty are often connected to divine authority or a deity. Select and fully identify two works and analyze how the principles of design reveal the cultural traits. The cultural traits connected to religion. Huh? Yeah, that's fine. I guess. That's fine if you want to do that. You can also go to that link too. If you're using your phone, you might as well go to the link. Take a screenshot or whatever. All right. You got Ashley?
Yes. I'm reborn now.
All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at what we were going to do yesterday on Friday, but we never got to it in part because you guys were writing essays, and I thought it was more important to set up that. It seemed like we were at a good place for that. You might notice that'll happen sometimes when I want us to do just a real quick activity. Sometimes it expands a little bit longer. Again, because I want to make sure that you guys are clear on my expectations, and that writing, because it's super important, it might take precedent over the lectures. And that's good for you guys. At least it could be good for you guys because you're getting actual advice about writing, and I'm also an English teacher, so that helps. But it does. The downside is we might not always get the quality of lecture time about the actual content. So that means you're going to have to do your own stuff. You're going to have to do a little bit more of that background in the chapter. If you're not reading the chapter, you're going to be failing the test. There's really no point in getting through the packets just writing and copying down what I say anyways. It's going to be those chapters that are going to give you the content knowledge that you need in order to pass. In 2 weeks, we'll have our first exam. It'll be like our midterms. So we'll have our midterm exam. That'll be a big deal. Okay, so you can't just slough off or expect because you've been doing well in the packets that somehow corresponds to you knowing the content. So that's where at least going through and starting the process of reading through the pictures and the captions that go with those pictures and the summary at the end. Those are very important things. Let's look at the temple. The temple, this is a particular look at Greek architecture and its connections not only from the past but also in future iterations of future cultures and how they look together. This isn't a warm-up necessarily. You just need. We can do a quick discussion here. What are the purposes of having spaces of worship? Have you ever thought about that? Why is it that people go to church? Why don't they just sit at home and do their own thing? Why does it seem like everyone every culture has this place that they dedicate. Yes.
Because they feel like that they're closer to God and everything.
But why is that? I'm trying to get deeper than that. But you're right. That is one of the reasons why people go is that they get closer to God. But why is that?
Because they're not home like.
So it maybe has something to do with the fact that the God is located somewhere, and that I need to go to Him. That might be a reason. Yeah.
Could be to like so you won't be disturbed while practicing whatever religion.
Okay. So there's some type of ritual that's based in propriety and silence, or some other type of way of not being disturbed. Good. Francesca.
Maybe it's a sort of dedication.
Dedication. Explain that further. What do you mean?
That you're willing to go somewhere to worship your God, and you care that much about your religion.
The fact that we build things, the fact that we go and sacrifice time and energy and resources show that we are pious. So there might be a faithfulness to that. Good. What else?
I think it has something to do with unity. So like people who go to church, they want to be. It shows that as a civilization and a social structure that we all worship this one God, and that's why they have places for people to go.
Good. Social identity, cohesion, unity. That we all, when I go places with people who worship and are thinking like me, it gives me a sense of what we call solidarity. It's one of the things of the human condition that I need to know. If there's someone else out there, just reach out and touch someone. It's like that. Yeah, I need that contact from others. So that might be a reason for the spaces of worship. What else, Justin?
I was gonna say because like church or whatever, it's like a place with no sin. So it's like a place where it's all fresh and stuff, and you're here and there's nothing bad around you.
Yeah, it's. Everyone write that down. Church is fresh and stuff. What's up? Welcome to the Church of Fresh and Stuff. I like the fresh and stuff. That's good. But you're absolutely right. In fact, all of those were different categories that you would want to discuss. So to kind of go back, Jesse's point was, what was your point again, just so I remember?
They're closer to God.
You become closer to God, so you're like part of the locatedness of the deity. So you should be writing these down because they're better than what I could analyze. Why is there spaces of worship? Connection to deity. There was Atticus' point on. What did you say? Lorraine said what did you say? I'm getting out of order. I'm getting out of order. The unity. So we have connected to deity, the unity, the sacrifice of time and energy, and that it's a place of no sin. We'll go with that.
I'm really gonna read that church.
What did Ben say?
Like they practice whatever religion in peace.
And peace, so that they're separated. So it's separated. That's the last one. There you go. Sorry about that. I got out of order. You guys are all like, sorry. Sorry. You're dumb. You can't remember 10 things at once. Someone presenting. Sorry.
Are we recording right now?
We are. I'll just edit this part out.
No.
Just cut that. Start again. Ready? 3, 2, 1. All right. This Mark's perfect teacher. And let's go in here. What is the reason for people to worship? And how does architecture relate to religion? Obviously, those different points that we talked about just now relate to these other questions of architecture, why we build things, why we have, just like your house, everything that has to do with your house and how your home is converted from just an architectural space and property to a place of meaning. The same thing applies to worship spaces in which sacredness, which is Justin's point about no sin or fresh and stuff, is actually a word called sacred or holy. But there's a separateness to the space. Today, maybe even in a post-religious context, although there's certainly many religious people around, are there holy spaces that are not necessarily dedicated to religion? Are there holy spaces? Like what? That's hard, right, to think about. I want you to think
Blue
of
Mosque.
No, that's
well, that sounds pretty religious to me. I'm
It's
not
in
sure.
Istanbul.
They're holy that we consider like
They go
sacred.
This is this is kind of an interesting question that I want you to think about, so I'm not going to answer it yet. The idea of space being separate and even holy, even though it might not necessarily be overtly religious. What is? I'll show them. Set apart and special and sacred, whatever that might mean, in a religious way that's defined a certain way. So, anyways, I want you to think about those things as we look at the temple. This is a lot of writing. I'm gonna. You guys have already looked at the. Turn off the lights, Dominic. You guys have already looked at the descriptions of the temple plan according to the Greeks. So, to reiterate that, the pronaos is in the beginning of the Greek thing there. The naos, or the cella, which is the interior. This is where the God dwells. Unlike modern churches, temple structures were not based on weekly worship, in which the naos was filled with pews and you listened to some motivational speaker at the front tell you about God or tell you about what it means to have Him applied in your life. Those weren't the things that happened in Greek temples. The temple was, as Jesse mentioned, more emphasizing the house or the locatedness of the God for the benefits of the community. And then also to Francesca's point that you would build and you would dedicate and sacrifice your time and money and energy building something as a form of sort of a victory. It was a political statement as much as it was religious. And so you would build things as a way of showing that you had victory and that you were giving that victory to a particular god who was sort of your patron god. Athena, Nike, Zeus, Poseidon. These are the main gods that would be used in terms of the victory dedication, depending on who was your sponsor. And so the god would locate himself through a statue in which people, specialized people like priests today, would be utilized for the purpose of the people, that they would maintain the god. This is the ancient world's conception of God, that a special people are dedicated to help them in their locatedness. Give them sacrifice, give them meals, clean their shop, whatever, but it's their home, or at least one of their homes, in which they can interact with people. Meaning the place isn't a place to congregate. Yeah, those other definitions that you guys talked about coming together, solidarity, not so much the case when it's in the ancient world. Moving on the back areas here, these might be other areas of preparation, as well as the back porch. All right, so this plan is actually a very important plan because you'll see it develop over time and evolve throughout the course. And we can look at these compared holy spaces, which this is probably the most important section of this thematic unit. The rest is just going to be the evolutions within Greek times between the Doric to Corinthian column orders. Really, the key to this thematic unit is just considering how it is that human dwelling regarding sacred space, so the idea of taking spaces and turning them into holy spaces, the separation of regular spaces from holy spaces, and then what those spaces were used for is all very, very interesting and kind of important in its own right. For instance, when we look at this, the dimensions, or each one of these will be different layouts. We see some different emphasis here. This is the interior of the Kaaba, which is of what religion? Islam. The Kaaba is a structure. It's a dwelling place in which there is massive amounts of devotion around. Here is one of my students last year. Her name was Duha. She represented the Kaaba, and this is the structure here. So you can kind of see what she did with it. Notice what is different about this kind of shape than the shape that we saw with typical Greek temples like the Parthenon.
It's a square or it's a cube.
Yeah, it's a cube in design, so it's cubular. So someone said rectangle. It's not in two dimensions. I tell my son, who's 3 years old, I'm trying to get him to distinguish the difference between forms and shapes, because it's 2 dimensional, 3 dimensional. So he's really good at that now. He doesn't call things circles; he calls them cylinders if they are cylinders. Cuboids if they are rectangular, 3-dimensional objects, right? Or cubes. So spheres and circles is the first one, right? He's like, bring the circle. Nope, that's a sphere. It's a, you know.
Your head is a sphere.
Exactly. Anyways, I'm kind of a geek like that. Geek for word correction and word specification. The Kaaba is a very specified building structure. It's built as a cube based on divine proportions. These are Quranic proportions. They're meant to be a sense of holiness connected to it. Inside are sort of relic elements that you would be utilizing, and I believe the spot I'd have to double check it, but it has to do with the Abrahamic covenant. So these elements here go back as far as the Old Testament. Now the Kaaba is not a space. Do you think it's a? Well, I should say, do you think it's a space in which people are cramming inside for worship?
Yeah. Well, no, they're not going in. They're trying to.
Well, when we see the Kaaba, we don't just see the Kaaba in sort of isolation. We usually see the Kaaba at the time, well, in fact, most of the time in which people have completed their Hajj or their pilgrimage. So the pilgrimage spot is usually pretty filled with people around it. It's usually a very populous type system. So the sacred space here is not necessarily meant for worshipers to go inside, but to revere from the outside as a completion of a very important journey. And so the whole structure also is housed and encased in a very much more larger practical structure of maintaining these great crowds that usually surround the object and move around the object in a given number of times. It is all part of their worship. And you notice that along with the Greek temple, these are based on sacred proportions. So again, architecture and principles of design are related to meaning and holiness in this sense. You see the three pillars inside of the Kaaba. Let's see, what else is there? And that's about it for now for this one. So you notice the cube shape is going to be an interesting design feature throughout the times. You can see, in fact, that cube shape also exists in the Christian context. In the early Christian conception, which is actually around the same time as the development of Islam anyways, a little bit earlier, about the 4th century, you start getting a cohesive Christian culture throughout Italy and extending out into Europe and into the Middle East. You also have, maybe a couple of centuries later, Islam sort of rising up in about the 7th century. But we both are developing first away from the Greek temple structure of the longitudinal lines, the rectangular lines, and more into these perfect proportions, cubes. So with this work here, we call this the just radial plan. So this is a radially planned church, meaning the center of your object is the main structure that everything goes towards. It's radial, like a flower. So early Christian churches were radial. Again, to diverge away from the Greek and the Roman longitudinal plans, the long rectangular plans, they're meant to focus on the center point. Center point also had often a skylight, so they would let in light from the top. It's very symbolic, right, of the idea that God is dwelling. He's not in a statue, so there wasn't as much of an emphasis on statues yet. Instead, he was more of this ephemeral being, this being of light, omnipotent, monotheistic. Around them, though, there are strong structures. In Christianity, there is a strong emphasis on sort of community within the church. And this is for all the great monotheistic theistic religions, including Judaism and Islam. But in particular, within their structures here, we have like classrooms and other rooms in which the community is brought into the temple, quote unquote. It's not a temple anymore, it's a church. But brought into the temple in order to understand and be literate in the holy text of Scripture. Christianity, Islam, Judaism, they spread through the teaching of people. It's not, at least in the beginning, it's not starting, Christianity does not start as a civil religion. In fact, it's a persecuted religion. So it develops in a different way. It's through word of mouth and through teaching. It's not through victory over warfare. Yes, that comes later. Christianity was a persecuted religion during the Roman Empire. So I'm giving you that a little bit of background because I think it influences the way in which they broke away from Greco-Roman longitudinal plans, that is again rectangular plans, and moved again to something more radial. Kind of get the sense of equality of people, get a sense of community, so that around the objects are places of teaching as much as worshiping. Meaning you're not just for Christianity, it's not about like maintaining the housing space of God. There's no God that comes down in a statue in Christianity yet. That comes later. There's going to be reliquaries and statues and important things that happen as the religion evolves and develops. So there's the radial planned Christian church. And then by the Romanesque period, so this is the 12th century, 12th and 13th century CE. So this is quite a bit of ways off now after the Middle Ages, or towards the end, tapering off of the Middle Ages. We see the churches expand back out to adopt Greco-Roman ideals again. There's almost a cycle pattern of how churches evolve. And they evolve back to this pattern for various reasons. One of the reasons is we want to look more like the Greco-Roman world. That world becomes farther away from us, and so we forget the persecution of those, the paganism of it. Instead, we start nostalgizing it, being nostalgic about it. Meaning it becomes like the golden age of reason and architecture. Because they had some cool stuff that kind of got lost in the Middle Ages. The emphasis changed. It was not about big stuff anymore under Christian Europe. It was about something different. And so when you start developing again, you start mirroring, once again, Roman architecture. It starts going into these longitudinal plans, starts getting big and magnificent. And so you start trying to build bigger and bigger and bigger. You use the rectangular plan not because it becomes this huge nave just dedicated to the god, but then you fill that nave with what? With seats. Yeah, we call them pews, right? In the modern lingo. Sitting in a pew. There's a Confucius saying about church here. It's Confucius say, "He who farts in church has to sit in his own pew."
Wait, does that count? Sorry.
That's an awful joke. You get it? Okay. Pew as in your smell.
Oh.
Pew. Has to sit in his own pew. Okay. And no one wants to sit around you. It's a double entendre. Okay. Anyways. Shh. There's some more. You suck at joking. The nave is filled with pews, so it actually becomes a community-based system of worship as well as everything else. And also because it becomes a practical thing, much like the Kaaba, you have these aisles that get developed so that people can walk around the outsides of them, go all the way around the apse, look at the back of the altar place, come back around and then leave the church silently at the end. Now, why would you need people to be able to do that efficiently in a church? Yeah, you can have multiple things going on. You can have the inner circle of people who are sitting and praying for their grandma to be healed of her, warts on her face or something like that. And these people on the outside can be doing some sort of prayer journey or walk that gives them their own sense of worship. This structure of making sure people are undisturbed is a discernible, and it's an intentional thing. So anything that, if you've ever gone into a church and had that sort of experience of transcendence, that was designed. It was designed by the artist. There's an artist that made that. I'm not distinguishing. I'm not saying that you don't have a real experience when you go into a place, especially a place of your own religion, and think, "Wow, this is so beautiful. I'm feeling something." The artist helps, and the way the structure is planned helps. And when you walk through it and you feel like it's easing you into your worship, and you feel that sense of peace. All of those things are a result of an artist who's designed it. So these aisles, they're also just a practical function. Because all around the edges here, in the Middle Ages, they developed what are called reliquaries. Important things that Christians will view and value as healing, as sacred. These are usually bones and pieces of things that are important that people touch. It becomes a way in which whole towns develop commerce and economy. You get a little skull of the Apostle Peter, and you're on the map. So reliquaries become important to these churches as well. That's why they develop the whole structure as it is now. By the Gothic period, some of the and I guess I should back up for a second. What shape ultimately is created in this?
No, it's the cross.
It's a cross. I forgot to mention the very basic element, the longitudinal plan along with the transept. So this is the transept or the transept bay, which is in the center here. This structure creates a cross, which is, of course, a central Christian symbol. So just to see that as well. By the Gothic period, there's a higher emphasis on the altar place. If you notice here, that this structure, as opposed to the structure in the past, here the central structure is the transept dome or something along those lines. For the Gothic period, it'll be all the stained glass on the altar place, so that as you move forward, the emphasis becomes more on what's happening at the end of the church than anything else, because they have all this stained glass in the front. It's like brilliant. It's a beautiful thing, and the light's coming in, and it's creating all this symbolic transfusion of light with color. It represents Christ's deity and incarnation and all this beautiful stuff. So they're going to be like, oh, and it becomes this beautiful gold thing that happens in the front. And so then there's an emphasis. You notice how they changed. There's all these radiating chapels in this area to take advantage of that space. Yes?
I was just wondering, what did they do with the dead people? Did they now go to
Crypts and then graves next to the church. We talked about that, if you remember the thematic unit on funerary elements. Some important people were actually in the church itself, or under the church. Crypts for lesser people, graves for lesser people. Yeah. So Christians didn't have this aversion to death as like a sacred space. That was one of the reasons why churches existed, was to deal with the dead.
So was it actually something from like Sarah would do now?
They do what?
You know how when the person died,
Yeah.
they give them like speech and ceremony kind of thing?
The eulogy and all that kind of stuff. That is developed as a Greek to Christian thing.
Oh.
The use of ashes and the cremation is a Greco-Roman invention. So it's an ancient practice. Christians didn't like cremation because it interfered with the resurrection of the dead.
Indeed.
Yes.
I'm just kidding.
Can't be resurrected unless you have a body, corporal body. If it's ashes, ain't gonna happen. I always find that a little bit interesting, because if you're resurrecting a dead body that's been literally decayed for thousands of years, as opposed to a cremated body, you're already in the realm of miracle. What does it matter which one it is? But, I don't argue with that. But I think it was an interesting problem that existed throughout time, even in certain states now. It's in certain areas of this country still. I think in the South, it's illegal to cremate, and they actually have these big mortuary-like things, crypts, large crypts in New Orleans. You can actually, but you put them in there, and you know that like they're gonna rot out really quick because it's so hot, and they're gonna cremate, but you haven't actually done it. So there's certain places in which you don't have to deal with it, because it's going to happen anyways. So those are some holy space comparisons. There's a good question about death there, by the way. Say again?
Bad because they melt and everything, it decays, like it's slow process.
Yeah, I don't know.
At least cremation, it's like boom. Okay.
Sure.
Guys.
Why is it a
We also have a really interesting sort of, I mean, we do our own sort of sacred elements, even post-religious. You just whisk the body away and make it all like plasticized, is the best way I can describe it, so that it's ready to view, but it looks very like doll-ish. That might not have been normal practice throughout history, so I think that's part of that is our sense of, maybe a little bit of our sense of vanity as a culture now, that we want to look at a dead body, it's like, but it's got like makeup on it and like plastic, and they do all sorts of crazy stuff to make sure it's preserved so that it doesn't decay properly. But anyways, there are better ways to decay a body. I don't know how to get into that. If you're interested, I'm really interested in the topic, that's why I talk about it. But there's a book called Stiff. It's a really good one. It's about what happens to your body after you die, and it's the journey that begins of your corpse, which is kind of a different thing than you, right? Your corpse is it's weird. So if you're interested, if you like to be morbid, it's October, so it's Halloween. Read the book Stiff. It's interesting. What happens to your corpse after you kick the bucket? Different influences that existed in Greece, just as a review of this so you can connect it to. In Mycenaean cultures, you have the development of the pediment. So this pediment as opposed to just a post-lintel. In fact, you can see the hybrid going on here very clearly, that the pediment structure, and then, we got to do something else. We got a different shape. Let's throw in triangles. Triangles are really good. When we get into the Roman structures, what do you think is going to be another innovation, or I should say emphasis, on the structures above objects such as post-limitals? What is Romans like? There's a big structural thing that they do.
Domes.
Yeah, like domes and arches. Arches are going to be a big deal. Roman arches are like the big deal, right? But right now we just get the Mycenaean pediments. In the Aegean period of early Greek conception, we get the development of the pyramid. Engaged columns, again, of Egypt are early developments. I've talked about that several times, so make sure you know it. And then you get those two things developed together, columns and pediments, and you get Greek temples. So the two structures are based on prior ones. It's kind of like evolution or the adaptation of species. You have different things that develop over time. Certain things fall apart. In this case, this is in part designed based on human intelligence. Egyptians, it's not intentional in the sense that we're taking things like, I'm going to borrow a little bit from Egypt, I'm going to borrow a little bit from Mycenae. No, it's just sort of as cultures develop, they realize, and they start realizing based on what they've seen in the past and what they've heard about and how they develop. Over time, these things hybrid together, and we get to look at it. It's really interesting. Wow, that's from Egypt. Wow, that's from Mycenae. And they've developed these spaces over time. The drapery in the center here is going to be very important for the classical conception of sculptures. The fact that they can not only take the objects, the anatomy of the being, but also create this drapery that then folds over them is a unique development in the Greek classical period. That was one of the porches in the Parthenon that's now been converted. Unlike the Egyptian temple, or conversely the future Gothic church, the orders of Greek architecture are so unified that we should be able to identify them in the monuments themselves. Gothic churches are going to be based on a canon, a general canon, but they're going to be different based on where they are. Greek temple structures, though, are unified, meaning within the classical period, they're all kind of doing the same proportions. Remember, the golden mean is super important. That's why I had you guys measure yourselves and see how much you live up to that standard. Because the Greeks had a pretty simplified view of proportion. I should say a unified, not simplified, but unified. They all believe that you're moving in this objective way to the ideal. Vitruvius, for instance, on temple proportion talks about it like this. Without symmetry and proportion, there cannot be principles in design of any temple. That is, if there is no precise relation between its members, as in the case of a well-shaped man, the other bodily members may have also their measured ratios, such as the great painters and master sculptors employed for attainment of great and boundless fame. Essentially, he's saying, just as the body has certain proportions that we immediately recognize as beautiful, so also architecture has these same proportions and symmetries within them. Important quote. There was a year in which a quote about from Vitruvius on the Polycletan canon was used, about the members and the fingers connected to the hand, and you were required to identify that it was in fact Polycletus in which this was referring to. If you weren't able to identify Polycletus as the structure of that quote or the reference of the quote, you would have failed that question. So, to give you a sense of the importance and specificness of your knowledge, specification of your knowledge connected to these quotes that we have. I can't anticipate all the quotes, but I can give you a sense of their ideas of the different cultures throughout time, and then you have to make the connections on the test itself. Since Roman times, the Greek achievement in architecture has been identified with the three classical orders: Doric, Ionic, Corinthian. Ionic and Corinthian are technically of the same order. They have the same structure of the column, and they occur roughly around the same time. The Corinthian column developed in the earliest Tolos of the Socrates. You have that, and I showed you that in the past, or last week. The difference being those acanthus leaves, those leaves that are at the top of it, as opposed to volutes. But it's the Corinthian order that lives on in Roman architecture as the prominent form. But unlike Greece, who's very unified, Rome's going to be very eclectic. It's a much larger and broader culture because it's a much larger empire. We know the Dick. Huh? Dick? We know the Dick, yes? Okay, Doric, Ionic, Corinthian. Nothing, not to be confused with anything else. Despite what they look like. But make sure you do know the differences between them and that you can talk about each aspect of them. You don't understand the difference? You can see the differences, correct?
Yeah, like just
My favorite is the Corinthian.
The biggest differences will be the Doric, between the Doric and the Ionic, is the capital of the column itself is more of like this sort of doughy foot, I should say, or this like sort of this holding simplified spherical object as opposed to two volutes, more of a symmetrically based object. You have thicker shafts that are wider at the base, or where the stylobate is, as opposed to up at the capital, so that it feels like the weight of it is pushing downward. The Ionic columns are straight and fairly skinny, unified all the way up. And that's the same with the Corinthian columns, except at the top you often have some type of acanthus leaves, like leaves that kind of float out, and it looks a little bit more a sense of natural or nature or organic. It's pointy.
so that happened. That's like time change.
Again, yeah, these orders were stratified, so they don't evolve into each other. You get the Doric order early on in the Parthenon, for instance, early classical, and then later classical is like the Ionic and Corinthian orders. Good question. Corinthian comes out of Corinth, and Corinth is built up as a prominent city. And Dick is the really ironic acronym. Towards the end of the 7th and during the 6th century BCE.
Ironic or ionic?
Ironic or ionic? Very ionic. They sound alike, so they're evolved the two major styles of Greek architecture, Doric and Ionic. Evidence indicates that the older Doric order did not appear until after the Greeks had made full contact with Egypt. So this is interesting. They had that full contact, and then all of a sudden Doric order appears. There's a theme developing here. That sacred spaces are shared throughout cultural development. So that might be a portrait of humanity note or whatever, if you want to start including that. That sacred spaces and the way in which we develop them seem to be shared throughout different cultures. I've already sort of shown you a pretty good argument for that, just based on the development of Islamic, Christian. At least at the core, there's a sense of proportionality. There's a sense of beauty connected to principles of design, and that at the highest point of the argument, that there is literal direct contact, and that literally I'm borrowing from other culture. The Doric orders are developed when they make contact with Egypt. Began in 664. The earliest representation of Doric capitals appear on the Proto-Corinthian shirt of about 650 BCE. We saw the differences in the two here. I'm not going to rehash this. You need to know this for your ancient exam. You're going to need to fill it in. So there are ways to find this. In chapter 5, there's a way. You can look online. You can practice it. You can have flashcards. You can make a dick party and do flashcards. Everyone plan your dick party.
Wait, what?
What are you talking about? Okay, I'm just kidding.
You're gonna have a dick party?
Just a Doric Ionic Corinthian party, okay?
He knows what a dick
You
is.
know nothing else. I didn't say anything.
Wait, so we all have dick?
Make sure to edit this part out.
You just really got Really?
What? You don't need to take a picture of it.
I
It's
was
on.
about to take a
Yes, I'm taking a picture.
Stop making pics of dicks.
I got a new phone, so I'm gonna try this out here real quick.
What found you?
Actually, that's just a D. That's just a D.
Shush. Here, hold on. Okay, Google. What are the different orders of the Greek temple?
Didn't.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. You didn't catch that.
What? You're looking at.
Wait, but
I should be like, what is the what is the dick? Or like, what are the orders of the dick? Oh no! No. Anyways, then I can pull
Do
it
it.
up.
I dare you.
I'm pretty excited. I'm gonna do this more often. If someone has a question in class, I'll be like, okay, Google. I don't know anything. I'm gonna use my transactive memory.
Don't trust
Like
Siri.
this, why do you say okay, Google?
Because that's what gave me the thing. Okay, Google.
I never use that.
Do you have a Samsung?
Yeah.
So you need to use the OK Google. It's great. You just click. You say OK Google, and then you just tell, and then it says, "What do you want?" It's really cool. It's better than
No, I
Siri.
just played it and it just lets me say.
Siri sucks.
Siri sucks. Okay, moving on.
Siri sucks, bitch.
Siri does not. Siri does not like Doric Ionic. And by 480 BCE, shortly before their defeat by the Greeks, the Persians destroy the temple structure of the Acropolis. So we have sacred spaces being attacked as a symbolic gesture of two competing and rival empires. This is an important thing about the portrait of humanity, that symbolically, if I destroy the temple or the sacred spaces, it's a way in which I show the destruction of the people. So they destroy, the Persians end up destroying the temple statues of Acropolis. And this is where, when we see the reign of the leadership of Pericles in the actual Mycenaean wars against Persia, you actually see a rebuilding of the structures, and this ushers in the classical era, the high classical era that we see today. So all this is to say is that they're developing sacred spaces based on conflict. So conflicts are often develop resurgences in victorious, holy architecture. The Parthenon being the only structure completed before the Peloponnesian War. Again, the Peloponnesian War in 430 BCE is unfortunately the result of Pericles not using his money wisely. He's using it to use symbolic sacred spaces on the Acropolis
Like the pharaohs.
as to be victorious, much like the pharaohs. Again, they've had contact the last 200 years with Egypt. Unfortunately, it causes strife with Sparta, who really just wanted its money back. He didn't really want its treasure to go to a victory temple on the top of the Acropolis in Athens. That seemed to be kind of sucky deal for the Spartans. So the Spartans attack, and you don't want to mess with Sparta. They will. This is Sparta.
Someone
Yeah,
texted me
I
that
saw
last
you,
night.
you're
I
like-
was so mad.
This
They had this.
is Sparta.
They had this
No,
group
yeah,
message.
you need
This
the
group
actual-
message going on. This guy's like, "This is Sparta in capital letters,
Right.
and everyone's like, stop.
There's a great quote. I'll pull it up to the slide tomorrow. Yeah, but it was actually recorded in history. It's in the movie 300 when they say Spartans. They shout out the Persian armies there, and they say Spartans, put down your weapons.
Yeah, my stepdad does that all the time.
And then Leonidas plays. This is actually historically. He says it. He says Persians, Melon, which means come and get them. I think that's really cool. So it's like, put down your weapons. Come, all right, never mind. Come and get them. Is what they shouted back. And it's historically it shows this is like total badass Spartan leader saying, "Come and get my weapons."
They were fast.
They rolled out the columns.
Yeah, they roll down the column like,
Just like trip
prepare the dick. Doric first, Ionic. Get him, knock him down.
No, Doric is still, Corinthians is the last because that's the prettiest one. They want to save the Corinthians.
Anyway,
That's why it
sorry.
survived so long, because Doric was
And this too.
Doric was good for it.
Oh yeah, we're on good because they didn't have a lot of more.
You guys bring out the best in me. Now some criticism here from Thucydides, which is a historian of classical Greece. Thucydides says that Athens adorned itself, quote unquote, like a harlot with precious stones, statues, and temples costing 1,000 talents. This was a damning critique of classical Greece. Even though we look at Parthenon, I have a friend of mine who I'm super jealous of. She's literally there right now. She's like posting all over Facebook, like, "Hi, here's me in front of Parthenon. Oh my god." She's like, "Look," I'm like, "Oh my god, I'm so jealous."
You give me a
We look at all that. Sacred space was beautiful, but to the people at the time, it might not have represented the things that we think of it as representing these perfect sacred spaces. For a lot of people, churches become a source of hatred or a source of spite, and same with the temples of the past. In the midst of poverty, we have this Parthenon being built for the sake of the victors and Pericles in all his poor leadership. So there were people who viewed it as being adorned as prostitutes. So this is an interesting thing that occurs with that. And then we have the Temple of Hera, which is the structures that Paestum represented in the door. Temple of Hera is in Paestum. It's outside of Italy, or it's in Italy, but it's outside of Pompeii. So when you go to Naples, you take a trip out from Naples into Pompeii, and on your way back, you go through Paestum, and you get a beautiful, nearly completed Doric order, very similar to Parthenon, in another rich area of the Greek Empire, which is in the Italy, the colonies of Italy. So, an interesting structure that exists today. Yes.
Have you ever touched one of the columns? I'm just curious.
Yeah, you can actually go. You can go inside it. No one's really caring about these structures. That's
Oh, you
weird.
can actually like go in and walk there.
Yeah, like here's us right there jumping in front of it. It's a massive structure. Imagine it in its full glory when it was painted and adorned.
Those are big steps. Who's going to walk up those steps? You have to like take pictures.
Well, it's a God's house, so it better be big. Okay. Let's go ahead and end here. This is the end of the thematic unit anyways. Again, I told you it was going to be kind of a smaller micro look at the evolution of temples, but hopefully it was a little bit enlightening about the evolution that has occurred and how different orders emphasize different things in their sacredness. Tomorrow we need to do classical sculptors and Hellenistic sculptors. So we're going to be looking at that in your package due tomorrow. On Wednesday, I'm going to be giving out your first non-Western art project. You'll have about a week and a half to complete that. Thursday, your essays due, so make sure that you are ready to defend it, not just write it, but defend it in person. Sign writing on Friday.
So were we graded on that 20 minutes that we had?
I don't know what's 300.
Yeah.
When's the AP test?
AP test is in May. So we're not thinking about that. Take care.
I don't know the exact date off the top of my head. I have to find it. I can ask Siri.